Waymon, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Fred, for having me.
Right now, you are a director, so there's like not really like complete 360 shift, but it's, I would say, probably like a
Close.
lateral transfer, yeah. So from
It's
music to directing. So there are two things that we'll be discussing. So your music and also, what you're doing right now, which is directing. So let's start out with the genesis. I know you've been asked like 1,000 times. So what's the story? Like, how did you get into music and why rap music of all the genres?
sure why rock music. I'm from my life story in a nutshell. I'm from New York City. I was born in the South Bronx, and when I was a kid, maybe 7 or 8 years old, I moved to Montreal. I moved to Canada. I moved to Montreal. So it was a very different lifestyle where I said everybody was black and from the hood, and then the
Mm-hmm.
next day everyone was white and French. And so it was a bit of a culture shock, but it was something that I grew to embrace. Like Montreal, Canada, ended up being an incredible place for me to just develop as a human being, and certainly safer at the time. And so my whole life, I grew up around music. My mother was a singer, and so I always looked up to what she did because she while she was never famous, she always sang background for a bunch of famous artists. And so I spent a lot of my youth almost entirely on the road, feeling like I was just another piece of luggage. And it took me into one of those where I don't know how to explain it. I just kind of always knew that that's what I was going to do. So if you had asked me at 8 years old what I wanted to be when I grew up, I would have said even then, I wouldn't have said an astronaut or a fireman. I would have said I'm going to be a singer. And so I only had a one track mind even as a kid. And it was a really interesting thing because I would always go to these clubs and these venues where I was obviously underage and watching my mother perform and seeing all of these artists perform. And then sometimes the place would even get, I remember a couple of times some places got raided and I'd have to kind of be shuttled out of the back of the venue. And so it was a very interesting, lonely, being an only child, it was a very lonely kind of existence of just singular focus. I didn't, all of my friends were musicians that were in their 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s, and I was still 10, 8, trying to kind of fit in. And so I just always knew music was going to be my life. And one of the cool things that happened in high school, one of the most Marty McFly moments was one day I was in high school and I was singing to myself at my locker, and this girl, very aggressive girl, her name was Marcy Klinger, I still remember.
Mm-hmm.
She looked and she said, "What the fuck is that?" And I looked around and was like, "What the fuck is what?" And she was like, "That voice." And she kind of caught me off guard. She was very aggressive, very aggressive chick. And so she kind of demanded, and I was still a little bit shy and still, I hadn't made a ton of friends because we moved around a lot. We're very poor. So I ended up moving to quite a few places because we never could pay rent and kind of leaving in the middle of the night. So I always had to keep making new friends. And so then I sang for her like a dancing monkey. And then I became a little bit of her dancing monkey for the next 6 months. Every time she wanted to be entertained with her friends, she'd make me come over and sing. And so one day I had gone to a birthday party and she was there. And I still don't know how she had this much power at someone else's birthday, but she managed to get the DJ to stop playing music and have me on a dance floor singing for the entire party. And I still don't know how she did that. But when it was over the next day, I was at my locker in high school, and one of these guitar players came over. Was like, "Hey man, I heard about the party last night." I was like, "Oh okay." He's like, "I heard you can sing. I want you to audition for my band." And I didn't know anything about bands as far as like what style of music it was. I just said yes. So they had an audition, and I didn't know. And someone told me it was rock music. I didn't care what kind of music it was. So I do remember being in the hall of my school and at home and singing a bunch of, because I just assumed it was like Rolling Stones music. So I remember singing a bunch of Rolling Stones songs until I got hoarse, thinking I could be even more rock. I wasn't going to lose this audition. And so I did the audition, and then that was my beginning journey into music, was my high school band, doing all the talent shows. And I quickly learned that you can you can make a lot of friends when you are the lead singer in a band and when you're in the arts. You can make a lot of enemies and you can make a lot of friends. And so it really did help me become much more, I guess, popular and accepted by all groups and all crews when we started to perform. And then we started doing Sweet 16s and taking it all very, very seriously. And then I kind of diverted from music for a little while because I didn't know what to do when I was getting older and it was time to go enroll into college. I was going to take music. And then my very sort of stern mother was like, "Why would you study music?" And I remember she was like, if you want to learn music, go and you want to impress me, go do a gig." Never forget that. So I decided to not take music and I ended up going to theater and film, which I didn't know would help me later on in life, but that's what I ended up studying because I didn't think I could study music. I wasn't a studied person. It was sort of an instinct. But then eventually we started playing a lot while doing a lot of music while I was still studying film and theater and Shakespeare and all of that fun stuff while still doing a ton of music. And that's really what was forming the basis of what later was able to become.
Now, did the country contribute to your love for rock music, or was it just, you
It
just grew
did.
up and then okay.
So there's a great movie called Almost Famous. A lot of people have seen Almost Famous, and there's a scene that it's all about this kid who grew up to be a journalist for Rolling Stone, and he meets Philip C. Hoffman, kind of teaches him about music, and I had that exact same spirit, the exact same. That movie always freaks me out when I watch it because my then very close, almost best friend, took me into his house and started educating me on music. At that point, I only knew soul music and Aretha Franklin and James Brown and Jackson Five changed my life, but I didn't know anything about rock music. And I remember I went into his house. And in his room, he had a full record collection, and it was just the coolest movie moment. And John Lennon had already passed, and I remember he had these four lights. Still remember four lights in his bedroom, and each one said Paul and John and George and Ringo, and the one for John was missing. And I asked him, who are these friends of his? Who are they? And he seemed to be rather disgusted that I didn't know who the Beatles were because I didn't. And so I then started every day getting an actual movie set education, just like that film did, where he would pull out all this older vinyl and introduce me to the Beatles and Bowie and Fleetwood Mac. And the first song he played was Fleetwood Mac, "The Chain," which still is one of my favorite tracks ever. So that's what kind of introduced me to this whole rock hybrid of stuff. And it because it came later in life and it was newer in life, then it was newer to my existence, to my bloodline of sort of understanding. It was something brand new and thought, oh, well, I could do that too. And then that's sort of what became part of my core being, was loving rock music as much as I had loved R&B and soul music just as much.
Nice. Now, while growing up, there were actually songs that I listened to that really affected me. Wherein, like, if I listen to it right now, it would take me back to a moment wherein, maybe I was in a different space.
Sure.
So, two of your songs, Yeah, Whatever, and then, I think God Can Explain, like, those are like the two popular songs, mainstream songs, and that was really a hit in the country. And, like, even up to today, the reason why I say that it's a popular song because my wife, who is not into rock music, memorizes the song. I think I can explain. So I know that it is a popular song because she knows it. So,
Right.
and one of the things I want to know is because I check Spotify and you're the composer
Hmm.
of the two songs. So I want to pick your brain a little bit, and then can you tell me how you create the words, the
Sure.
melody, so on and so forth? Yeah. The
Well,
process.
the process of it. So some of it is, to me, some of the process is really grueling and impressive. And then some of the process is very throwaway and effortless. That's just the truth of it. I always found that songwriting was grief mixed with luck. So I remember very specifically. So, Yeah, Whatever was something where at the time, so my kind of life story was when, because people always ask, like, how do we get a record deal and what was our sort of foray into that? But getting to those two specific songs was for a very long time when I moved back to New York City and we were trying to get a record deal. That was the thing. And all we wanted to do was get a deal, get a deal. And we had a bunch of CDs and we were sending them around to, we literally went to I would say maybe 75 packages that we would either mail or send in person. And one of the places that we sent it to, so there's an artist, Phil Collins and Genesis. And so Phil Collins has a publishing company called Hit and Run Music. So we went to Hit and Run, the actual office, and we dropped off a CD and we didn't hear from virtually anybody. But Hit and Run called us back saying, I really like what I'm hearing on this in this music. And we're interested in meeting. So they came to some shows and we hung out and they took us out to dinner and it was like this very nice kind of met this group of people and I really became fond of them. And so I would say after a couple of months, they said, okay, we're ready to do a deal. And we were trying to get a manager at the time, and it was a management company. And they said, okay, well, we want to sign you to a publishing deal. And we all said, great. And then we left the dinner going, what the fuck is publishing? So it turns out, quite literally, that the publishing company and the management company had two doors. So we knocked on the publishing door, not the management door. And those are the people that were interested in us. And I do feel like that's why sometimes it's grief mixed with luck. If we hadn't knocked on that door, because it's very unusual for artists to say that they got a publishing deal before they got a record deal. But one of the incredible things and very good things I'm so grateful for in my life was that even though we didn't have a deal and we were just writing demos and trying our best, they signed us to they gave us a little bit of money. They signed us to, I think it was like a 6 month deal and left it open saying, we'll do it for 6 months and we'll see. So we did it for 6 months. We didn't have a deal. So they extended it to a year. We did it for a year. We still didn't have a deal. So they extended it to 3 years. And we did it for 3 years and we didn't have a deal. And then they extended it to 6 years. This is a true story. And we still didn't have a deal. Then eventually in year 6, they just said, okay, it'll be in perpetuity. We don't want any time limits. We still believe in you. And one of the beautiful things that happened was it allowed me as this poor kid from the Bronx that had never been anywhere and kind of shuttled around, that even though we didn't have a record deal, the company were based in London and they had a lot of money. Phil Collins brought in a lot of money. And so it brought in, and even though we were only one of two acts that they had ever signed, they took us around the world. So without having anything, it's like how I went to Paris and to London and to Ireland and Belgium, and it was just like an incredible experience. I never thought I could ever live. I mean, later on it got even better, but I didn't know at the time that it was possible. And so one of the things that they also did was they put us in front of a lot of labels, and all these labels that passed on us again and again and again and again. And one specific label, we met with one of the heads of Interscope, and I remember that we were sitting we did one of these private showcases for him. And those are all, we didn't do many of them, and those are extremely difficult to do because it's the band doing its thing in front of one singular person. There's no crowd. So it's a very strange experience to have. And so what we ended up doing is I remember we'd finished the show, I guess we'll call it. We played maybe 6 or 7 songs to single applause. I remember it was our management and our publishers and our lawyer and him. There were 3 people, 4 people in the room. And when it was over, he said, you guys are pretty good, but I feel like you need to have a couple of catchier songs, a couple of catchier phrases. I still remember that. I didn't know what that meant, but he left. He was very kind, British guy. And he left, but we were still angry because we were left with nothing and broke. And so I turned to my attorney and I said, what the fuck was that? What do we do now? And he said, well, write something catchy. And I left the room and I said, okay, yeah, whatever. And then decided that that's what the title of the next song was going to be. True story, 100% true. And I had just very quickly after that, I was in a great relationship, or so I thought, and I had been dumped on my ass. And I spent a lot of time introspective, alone in my little apartment in New York. And then wrote you never know exactly how songs can become an inspiration to you. That's why I said grief versus luck. I just sat down, played one chord, and said, we don't have to stay friends. Let's pretend to be enemies, because I was so upset, because you get that thing when a relationship is over, if it's not completely hateful, usually it's, hey, I don't want to be in a relationship with you. We should be friends. And so I remember that that was the first sentence that came to me, and then just was inspired from there to kind of keep going and being mad the entire time. Mad that we didn't have a record deal, angry that I had to have a catchphrase, angry that I had been dumped on my ass. And all the lyrics and everything to do with that song was all enveloped into that. And I'm so grateful for that grief and that anguish, because that song is what helped formulate our band, really helped bring us together when we thought, I think we have something special in this one track. And I feel like a very prolific songwriter, where we would write tens and tens and tens to hundreds of songs. But when that one came together, and then the other weird thing that had happened, this is a long version, winded answer to your question. Another thing that had ended up happening was we fired our guitar player. So we were a four piece, and we'd gone through all these iterations of the band, and we fired our guitar player, and we simply couldn't find one. And this was during this sort of renaissance period for me of writing all of these songs. But I never played guitar on a stage before. I was always the singer, and I could kind of noodle and play sort of one finger and write melodies, but I couldn't play guitar. And so when I had written that song, sort of one finger at a time initially, we had decided, I got extremely cocky, as I tend to do, and we stopped the band for 2 months. So for 8 weeks, we didn't perform, we didn't do anything, so that I could learn guitar. And then we were so cocky that we ended up coming back and initially playing as a trio. And I was like, well, there's some balls for you. So I went from not playing guitar, really knowing how, to then saying, okay, now we're going to be a three piece, and I'm going to play guitar. I'm going to buy an amp, and that'll just be the three of us. And so that's how that song came to be. And with I think God Can Explain, which is really a song that helped to change my life entirely, that was simply showing up to rehearsal. And as we always did, I was a bit of a, well, not a bit, I was a lot of a stickler when it came to rehearsing. Some might even say a control freak when it came to rehearsing. We had to do that all the time, like we were athletes. And as usual, James, our bass player, was late, as he always was. And while he was late, I was just again sitting, kind of pissed off, waiting. And I just messed around with a few chords, and the chorus didn't come to me, but the first sentence did. And the first sentence, a lot of it sometimes gets inspired by a thought. So I was pissed off that he was late. And so I played the first opening chord and said, there's a lot of things that I don't want to know. And that for me was saying all of his excuses for being late. And the song took a complete different turn, but that was what I was. A lot of times I fiddle with the guitar and I speak to you. And then I can sometimes turn it into a song if I'm fortunate enough. So then that's how, and I do remember the drummer end up showing up, and the two of us, I wrote it very quickly, I would say inside of 6 minutes, without any thoughts. It just sort of came to me. And I played it once, the drummer just played along, and then the bass player, I guess he was late, but he purposely, apparently he just stood outside. And then when the song was done, the first rehearsal, first try, he came in and he said, there's the one. That's what we needed. That's the one. That's what we needed. And he was right. That's that song. And those two songs being on our demo, and then it changed the trajectory of things. Then we started to be able to become a recording artist because of it.
Right. It has definitely touched a lot of lives, and thank you so much for creating that. Now, the question that I always ask every musician is, when you make a song, what comes first, or what do you focus first? Is it the words or is it the melody? So in your case, what do you
Well,
focus
the
on first?
beauty, so here's the beauty of it for me. It's 50-50. Sometimes it's the melody, and then because, and I know this will sound almost stupid, but because I didn't know how to play guitar, and had to teach myself how to play guitar. It meant that everything that I learned was wild. Everything was brand new to me late in life. Because if you were to, I guess if you were a kid and someone picked up a guitar and they taught you your basic 101 G chord and put your fingers here and your fingers here and play a G chord, when you're a kid, you go, wow. But I was a full grown adult still going, wow, because I didn't know chord progressions and I didn't know, I didn't come from like a cover band where I was learning other people's songs. So it's to this day, my, I like to think very proficient guitar playing all comes from my own stuff. I can't sit around a campfire and play, well, I guess I could play Smoke on the Water if you asked me to, with it being four notes, but I can't sit down and play you a bunch of other people's music because that's not how I learned. Usually you learn sheet music, you learn other people's songs and to then create your own. It was an emergency. We needed shit to happen. So I had to learn it on my own and then just learn at the end of the day, my own catalog of stuff. So sometimes it was really easy to discover a new chord, a new minor chord or something that I wouldn't have known. And then that could inspire songs. And I remember there's a song on our record called Supernatural. And at the time, I didn't know the chord progression. I just turn on an amp, play it loud, and put my fingers where they land. And then what? Oh, here's a riff, and here's a song, and here's a something, and everything became a new. I mean, the only advantage that I did have is that I have perfect pitch, so it did help me to kind of walk my way through stuff. So a lot of times it could either be here's a melody, and then I'll figure out chords, and then 50% of the time is like here's some chord progressions, and then it inspires a melody.
Nice. Now, let me just step back a little bit to what you said earlier. So 6 years without a label.
Yeah.
So 6 years is a very long time.
Oh, and it was definitely longer than 6 years of just that, and we were trying for about 4 years before that. So it took us about 10 years before we actually signed and inked a record deal, which is a
Right.
very, very long time to be broke and have nothing. But I'm sorry, finish your question.
Yeah, like what pushed you to continue? Like what drives you? Is it just the passion or you just have no options at the time? That's why,
Wow,
just gonna,
that is, it's funny when you say that. That's the second one. There were no options. There were no options. There wasn't any options. And one thing, a series of really good coincidences happened. So I used to always, because we were rejected by so many labels and people, and one of the beautiful things that happened with this publishing company is when we signed our publishing deal, we didn't have any money. We didn't have two nickels to rub together. So when you sign paperwork, you have to get an attorney. Well, we couldn't afford an attorney. We didn't know any attorneys. So the company was so fantastic that they basically paid for us to find an attorney to litigate against them to sign the deal. So in the process, an amazing attorney named Peter Thal that I still have reverence for to this day, and he became our attorney, and he was the one that said, no, write a catchphrase. And so what ended up happening was, it's kind of a long train of events, but there was a singer named Rick Ocasek from the Cars, and Rick Ocasek was producing, although their name escapes me. They After he had done Weezer, he was producing this other punk rock band on Sony, and the A&R person for the A&R guy for that band, the junior A&R, was at the studio and met my attorney, who also represented this band. And so, man, the band's name escapes me, but they formed a little bit of relationship. He sent them our music, and then I got a call from my attorney saying, "Hey, this guy over here, he likes your stuff." I was like, "Cool," but I've heard that for 7 years now. Awesome. Then we did a couple of shows. We were playing at CBGB's. We were playing everywhere around town, and I would hear Peter would call and say, "Hey, he came to the show and he liked it." But I always had this theory that I still stick by to this day, that is, if someone was interested, you're not going to hear it by proxy. They're going to meet you. They're going to shake your hand. They'll come backstage. If you're an athlete and someone scouts and thinks you're an incredible, they will come down. They will take steps down those stairs, down the bleachers to come speak to you directly. And he didn't. So I just called bullshit on it. We ended up So every year they don't have it anymore, but every year Yamaha used to do like a battle of the bands, and the bands would go to like Japan. I think was their final like gig where you would win when you'd win that stuff. So we were desperate and bored, so we entered this thing, and we ended up winning. Like you have to do, I think we had to do a show in New York, then we had to do a show in Portland or Boston or something, and we ended up winning. And so they flew us to LA where we had to do. They stopped doing the Japan thing at that point, and they made it. I think it was at I forgot the theater out here in LA. And so we went there and we performed. And I remember the road to us having any success was when the show was over. A guy came up to me, as I expect in my thought process, saying, "Hey, I think you guys are really good. I started this independent label. I would be interested in talking to you." And I said, "Great." So he gave me his card, he shook my hand, and I took it seriously because that's what I believe is when it is real. And so we flew back to New York, and then he called and was interested in flying us because at that point we were a trio. We were the cocky trio with me just playing guitar. It was just the three of us. And he said, "Okay, I want to fly you guys out to back to California to San Francisco and meet my brother and see the facilities." So they flew us out and they wined and dined us and they took us to this incredible. I still can't believe they had this, but it was this compound that had a recording studio and an internet sort of bar and a film studio, and it was this. We had to take a golf cart to go see this compound. They're just incredible. And so we told this to our attorney and said, "Hey, we want to sign with these guys. It's the only offer we have on the table right now." And my attorney, unfortunately, he's like, "Okay, I'll get some paperwork together." But what I didn't know, I know later on in life, but I didn't know at the time, he purposely screwed us and never got that paperwork signed because he really believed that the Sony guy was serious, even though I hadn't shook his hand and met him and all my other bullshit, that he would be interested in working with us. And so he delayed and delayed and delayed and delayed for months and months and months. And so the indie label kept calling saying, what's going on? Like, it's been 6 months. We offered you a deal. You haven't signed it. And I'm not knowing, it's my first contract. I was like, yeah, it's coming. I don't know why. Maybe this is just how long they take. I had no point of reference. And so I'll never forget the saddest day of my life of coming back to where you say like having no choice, because at that point, during this 9 months of having a deal on the table and not a lot of bad things were happening. We had no money. Had been dumped in a relationship. I got an eviction notice, on my apartment door in New York saying, "Get out. You have 30 days to get out." And it was a very trying time. And so we did this show. At that point, Splendor then did this show in New York, and I can't remember the name it was a small venue where they had finally set up this big showcase for all of Sony to come and see us. And the president was going to be there, our A&R guy was going to be there, and half the company. Somehow, 9 months later, and actually quite ironically, this little indie deal helped propel that because it still meant someone wanted to sign us and he had heard that we wanted to go with them. So I think it kind of pushed it along, the urgency to finally do something with us. And we get to this venue and it's a big deal because it's New York, and being a New Yorker, New York's sort of policy is we don't give a fuck. That's it. Play, don't play, show up. Like we don't care. There's so many artists and there's so much talent here. We don't care. And I remember it was a short set. We had to play from 8 o'clock till 8:30 for about 30 people from the label. It was the biggest showcase we'd ever done. And the president was late for the gig, as they tend to be. So we had to wait, and it's 8:01, and the owner's upset, and it's 8:05, and the owner's more pissed. So it was like 8:13, and they were like, "Hey, man, if this guy doesn't show up, we don't care who's coming. Get off the stage." So I remember we delayed it to about 8:20 before we took the stage because the limo came and the president of Sony is here and everyone is here ready to go. And we stood on stage and we played our first song, and it was a great vibe. The whole thing felt great. We played a second song, and right at the end of the second song, my mic went out. And I went, no, get nervous because my microphone went out, and I realized the amps were off and they shut off the power. I swear this is a true story. We played two songs and they shut off the power because our time was up and it's New York City and hashtag we don't give a fuck. So we had it was chaos. I'll never forget how much chaos. The A&R guy got into a fight, almost a fist fight with the sound man, and then Peter, our lawyer, was having a pushing match with the owner, and everybody scrambled out like a bomb had gone off. And I was sitting outside on a the sidewalk because we had pushed rolled all our gear off, and it would been 9 months of this hell, sitting there very lonely, very destitute, thinking it was our big shot and we blew it. And I remember that, and I to this day I still don't know where the other three members of the band were because I was watching all of the gears sitting outside on this sidewalk with my head down and the venue empty and thinking everything was over, and I didn't know what I was going to do with my life because there was no options, and I knew hitting the publishing company was going to drop us after all of this 7 years of this. And then the last slap in the face was our attorney came out and he said, "Hey, I'm really sorry about all this. I'll try to call them tomorrow. I don't know what we can do." And he goes, "And I hate to tell you this, but the indie label, they rescinded their offer." So even the indie label, I don't know why he had to tell me that night. He's like, "They pulled their contract, so I just don't know." And I went home to my apartment with my eviction notice, and I was in the kitchen, and there wasn't a lot of food either. And I remember, and to this day, I still have this weird thing about peaches because I cracked open a can of peaches and took out a fork, and I was eating peaches from a can. And it's always been a strange, even to this day, it's always been a strange thing where I won't eat peaches in a can because it reminds me too much of how depressing that was. And so I went to bed suicidal, thinking, well, this is it. And then the next day, he called and said, "I have some interesting news for you. I know it was only two songs, and I know we almost had a fight break out, and I know everybody left, but everyone was impressed with the two songs so much that we're going to do it again next week." And my life perked up, and there's a place out in New York called Arlene's Grocery, and where we had a little tiny place. I used to love that place, and we went to Arlene's Grocery and we did it, and they somehow brought all 30 people back again, and then they offered us a deal. And then that's when things really kicked into action. That's the long-winded story of how that came to be.
Thank you for sharing that story. Now, I have like two questions left before I ask about, your directing career. So, first question, or second to the last question is, no, it's at the tip of my tongue. Just a brief story or information as to where the name came from, Splendor. Just
So
brief
sure. So
story. Yeah.
Splendid. It didn't come from anything. It just came from a buddy and I were on a train, and we would write down names. We were trying desperately to just come up with a name. How about kitchen? How about table? How about this? How about that? And we saw a sign that said Splendid, and he said, "What about Splendor?" And we said, "Great." And that's how the name came to be. And we said, "We'll just spell it incorrectly." And we just went with the name, and it stuck the day after.
Well, that's a really cool story because I remember with Deftones, I'm not sure if you've heard of the band, but they also removed like one letter in Def.
Oh,
So
that's
instead
right.
of DEAF, so
That's
it's
right.
DF. Yeah.
It's just
Really
one
cool
of those
story.
band things.
Right, right. Now, I remember the question. Will there be a reunion?
I do not think so. We were going to like maybe 9 years ago, 8, 9 years ago, and it just kind of fell apart. And I don't see anything like that on the horizon. You never say never. I have nothing but still but love and respect for those guys. They all still play. James, the bass player, plays with Gavin DeGraw. He played with Pink. So did Mark Sussey, the drummer. He also played with Gavin DeGraw. Right now, he's on tour with Puddle of Mud and Adamant. So everyone kind of been doing their own thing, and then sort of my life ended up changing and taking a different direction. So anything is possible. And what's very funny is that I remember Mark and James came to the Philippines, and they were performing, I think, with Gavin DeGraw. It was one of those artists was out there, and they had called me as one of the times we were going to get together, and they're like, "We need to get together, and we need to go to the Philippines first." This is a real conversation where we were like trying to tour there first because we were getting so much airplay and attention, and we thought that would be a fun place to kind of start it out. But then everyone just kind of got busy and life went on, and so I don't think that's any time in the cards. But I know you never say never.
Thank you so much for that. Now let's proceed and talk about your what you're doing right now, which is directing and writing. Now I want to ask, from a director's point of view, the casting. So I think Ariel was black in the recent movie,
Okay.
and then Snow White, which is will be shown in 2025, Rachel Zegler, which is not,
Sure. Yeah.
which is not white.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, white as snow. So, in your point of view, what's your stance on that with characters not really playing with
I
the with
no.
what is stated as a character? Yeah.
Think I think I have mixed feelings about some of that stuff. So, for example, it didn't stick very long, but there were people that were upset that there were black people in the Lord of the Rings TV show, and I
Right.
thought, well, I didn't think that orcs and elves were historical people. They weren't real people. So I don't think it mattered exactly what race the orc was or the elves were. It doesn't have to say that they were black or white or probably
Right.
green. But at the same time, I'm torn because I love the diversity in that's kind of been pressed upon in the industry. And I think it's a great thing. I don't think the Little Mermaid being a black girl is, I think, one of the greatest things ever. But at the same time, I don't think that actors, regardless of race, should be allowed to be an actor. Like, I don't think that a gay person has to play the gay character any more than I think a gay person can't play the straight character. So it's kind of both. And I don't think but I do think it's necessary that it reflects what we see and what we do and what we have. I mean, for me, when I was a black man in a rock band, there weren't a lot of us. There still aren't. You got
Right.
great bands. You got Lenny Kravitz. You got Seven Dust. You have a few, but you don't have a ton. So there isn't a lot of reflection in the eyes of the artist. And I think people may not always realize that you see yourself first to be inspired. Then I think you see other people. It's not a universal law on it, but it's just my opinion of it. I think if you are a little poor Asian kid in a room somewhere and you see someone that looks like you because you're not really defining genders and racial equalities and I don't think that you're thinking about the finances when you're 8. I just think you kind of maybe that's why we like puppets so much because they're everything. They're not anything. We don't know Big Bird from the rest. Like they don't represent anything. That's why kids like them so much because they're not any kind of boxes in it. But I do it is real and I do love that it's there. I don't personally care if someone says, hey, we want to hire you because you're a person of color rather than you're any good. I'm like, I'll take the job and I'll prove myself. And if for some reason that's your reason for hiring me, which really hasn't been the case in my life, it's always gone against me, never for me. I'd have no problem with it as long as in the end I could deliver and do what needs to be done. Because what's so interesting about filmmaking that's completely different, it's completely different than music. In filmmaking, I'm 100% responsible, fiscally responsible for money and where things go. And in music, you don't give a fuck. If anything, you're cooler because you trashed a hotel. Not that I've ever done that in my life, but that you trashed a hotel room and then you did all these bad things and you were late for this and it's part of your cool factor. So it was, excuse me, a very different learning curve when you're dealing in the filmmaking world. But answering your question, I think diversity in anything is great, but I don't think that it has to be to the point where someone who is qualified to do it isn't allowed to do it because of color or race or gender.
Thank you so much for that. Now, I think I forgot the name of the director. Was it like Quentin Tarantino or I think it was him. So I think he was asked about sex scenes or sensual scenes in the movie. And he said he doesn't like doing it because it's awkward, it's difficult. So Like I wanna ask your point of view as well on that because the reason why I ask is because one of the shows that I really love is like How to Get Away with Murder, and I really
Okay.
love the show. And then there was a scene there wherein like two gay dudes, or I'm not sure if they were really gay, but they had a scene wherein they were doing it in a copier machine, and I was like, at the back of my head, I was like, it is so unnecessary and it's so awkward, it's so cringy. It kind of ruined it for me, kind of ruined the show for me. But
Sure.
I was focused on the story, not really that part, but
Right.
it kind of affected me a little bit. So I want to ask your thoughts on that.
Well, I think I have different opinions on that. Again, fiscally, from money and marketing, it sells, right? So there's no denying that that's what that is. I mean, Tom
Right,
Cruise is 61 years old and still taking his shirt off in Mission Impossible running around. That's part of the business. That's nothing I created or you created, the consensus of Earth created. So there is something to that from a marketing point of view. If there was a trailer, they would show two people lusting after each other, even if it's for 2 seconds, to put it in the viewer's mind that there's something titillating about this. So, from a marketing point of view, that's just life. Any more than, I guess, if you were Calvin Klein and you were selling underwear, you're trying to sell some sexiness to it. There is no denying that that's there, and people enjoy that, or it wouldn't be there. But filming them is not fun. Filming them is not fun. So in real life, it's completely choreographed, and an interesting thing that's happened, because I never had to do this until the last couple of years with the creation, well, not the creation of the Me Too movement, but with the uprising of the Me Too movement. It created a new job, which was an intimacy coordinator, a person, male or female, although I haven't worked with any males, that come on and they work no different than a stunt coordinator. And I mean that literal. If you were on a set doing stunts, I would come to you and say, lift your left arm here, or doing John Wick and fire this way and then tumble this way. Well, an intimacy coordinator does the same thing. You're going to put your hand here and kiss this part of the neck and lie on this part of the. So it's a very choreographed, unsexualized thing on the day. It's always, it makes actors uncomfortable. But the only difference in my experience of doing this is that it really depends on the actor. It's the actor that makes the process easier or not. And you don't know until the day. I did this, I had to do I did a television series where the two actors had to kiss, and it was an entire, I don't know, it was almost like a whole thing. The actor had to run off and felt violated, and there was this and there was that, and there was all this incredible drama that I could not, while I couldn't relate to it, I certainly was mindful and respectful, and had a very long sort of healing session for it. And then I've done others where the two actors they know the choreography and what to do. They go for it. I say cut, and then it's over. And there's no drama, and they're laughing when it's over. It's the same thing. I know it doesn't seem like it's the same, but it really is the same for emotional scenes. So let's say you've seen a million movies, a million shows where the actor has to cry. And there are some actors, they get on their knees and they cry to the heavens. And then I very gently say, cut. And then you say things like, everyone work quietly. And so everyone is very quiet and it's very respectful. And the actor's brought off. And is it okay to do another take? And it's all very ginger. And then I've also done it where they say cut, and as soon as you say cut, the actor like wipes their eyes, they snap out of it, and they're making jokes, and there's no, everyone's working loudly instead of quietly. So it's entirely dependent on the actor. I would hope, if I did have a message for any and all actors, I would hope that there'd be a way to be the second part where you just kind of wrap it up quickly and get over it and just realize it's all pretend. But you don't know. I mean, I've done one where we had to do a scene where a woman is getting, she doesn't get raped, but in the scene a man attacks her and tries to, and she escapes. And in real life she was traumatized by this, I guess from stuff from her past, and so we couldn't shoot. And so that you just don't know. You don't know. So there's no one formula. There is, I believe, one formula to the film making of it, but there isn't a formula to the talent and how they react to it. and how much you can discuss it. Or also, there's also the thing where they might not get along in real life either, which happens more than we imagine. Two co-stars that don't like each other, but yet they still have to do scenes of intimacy. And some of them have won Oscars and still couldn't stand each other, and you don't find out till many years later.
Oh, is that Charlize Theron?
No,
And the other guy, forget his
but I
name.
heard that.
The
I did
the
hear that.
Venom guy.
They didn't like each other in Mad Max, even though they had to do all that, and maybe that's why they didn't make another one together. But that happens all the time, and that's not the directors. That's just the actors and their experiences. And what I learned about actors, what I love about actors, and learn about actors is it's all their experiences that get to tell this story. So some actors tell the story, and then the story is, or their words on a page. Some actors live this story. This story is them. So they're actually going through it. You just don't know. And you have to respect, or at least I do. I feel like you have to respect everyone's boundaries and what everybody wants and make everyone comfortable to have a common goal of telling a story.
Thanks. Now, we are 7 minutes before the end of the interview. Now,
Okay.
like, I'm torn between two things because there's a game. Like, I want to share with you, see if you're okay with it. If not, I can just proceed to my last question.
You
So
can
let me
play the
just.
game. I'm all right.
Okay, so the game is very simple. So the criteria will solely depend on you. So it's up to you how you will choose the winner. So we're gonna put them against each other, and then whoever proceeds to the next round will have a chance to play for the next round until
Okay.
the very end. So let me just say the names to our listeners. So on the left, we have Britney Spears versus Christina Aguilera. We have Alicia Keys versus Beyonce. On the right, we have Missy Elliott versus Avril Lavigne. Jennifer Lopez versus Alanis Morissette. So let's start in the upper left. Britney Spears versus Christina Aguilera. Who are you going to choose to proceed, Waymon?
I would choose Christina.
Okay. Thanks. Alicia Keys versus Beyonce.
That's a tough one, but I'm going to have to say Beyonce.
Ooh. So we have Christina versus Beyonce.
Mm-hmm.
Next on the right side, Missy Elliott versus Avril Lavigne.
Missy Elliott.
Jennifer Lopez versus Alanis Morissette.
Jennifer Lopez.
Okay. So we have Missy Elliott versus Jennifer Lopez. Who will proceed to the semifinals? Is it Missy Elliott or is it Jennifer Lopez?
Missy Elliott.
Nice. Then we have Christina Aguilera versus Beyonce. Is it going to be an
Beyonce.
R&B?
Beyonce.
Okay. Before you say the winner, Beyonce versus Missy Elliott,
Yep.
what is the criteria?
The
that you use?
criteria. Ooh, they both have good criteria, but I would say who I think is the best vocalist, not just the best star, but who I think is the best actual technical vocalist. And if I had to spend a whole bunch of money on a ticket, who would entertain me even more? So that would be my criteria, because tickets are not cheap.
Right. So who is the winner?
Then it'd have to be Beyonce.
Nice. Thanks. Thank you so much. So Beyonce is the winner. She will take home that yellow crown. What a silly game.
I bet you she doesn't have one.
Yeah, she doesn't have one for sure. Thank you so much for that. If another record label will approach you and will tell you, Waymon, we want to sign you, or we want you to play in a band, and all you have to do is just pick, your bandmates from other bands. So you pick,
Okay.
so you'll be the vocalist. So you pick a lead guitar, you pick a rhythm, you pick keyboards if you want one. You can pick the drummer. Who
Okay.
are those band members will be
Are
from
they
other
alive
bands?
or are they gone?
They should be alive so that there's a chance for you to work together.
To actually do it. Okay, so I think one of the best drummers is a drummer named Josh Freese, who now plays for the Foo Fighters, and he's played on almost all of the records a lot of the records that you've heard in your life. Josh Freese is actually the real drummer behind the scenes, so he would be my drummer. Bass player, I guess would have to be Flea, because he's the best.
Yeah.
Guitar player. Would I go with? Sadly, Frusciante's one of my favorite guitar players, also from the Chili Peppers. Not that the drummer isn't; they're both incredible, but I think he'd be a great drummer. Keyboards, I don't know. Keyboard players, I don't know any keyboard players as much as I would a guitar player, a bass player, or a drummer, who by name at least. We'll just put Stevie Wonder since he's still alive.
Okay. Thank you for playing, Wayman. Now, I'm down to my last question. Or
Okay.
like anything you would like to share or message to those aspiring musicians, aspiring directors, aspiring writers. What's your advice to them?
So my very sad and very forceful advice is just like Nike said, it's just do it. Because in my own lifetime of saying, hey, I've managed to get multiple record deals and movie deals and not by anybody just giving it to me, by just saying you have to just do it. So if you are a musician, I always say the world is like an audience of no's, and you're looking through a sea of no. Everyone is going to tell you not to do it. Everyone's going to tell you you're not good enough. Everyone's going to tell you that it's too hard. And really, through an entire sea of no's, you're just looking for one yes, just one, or even one maybe could be enough to kind of help change your life. And because that's one thing I feel sorry for artists, because I went through it in my own life. And I always give the same example. If you were at dinner and it was Christmas and there were a bunch of people, drunk or not, at a Christmas party, and you're sitting at a dinner table and someone said to you, said, "Hey Fred, what do you do for a living?" And you said, "I'm a plumber." They go, "Oh, okay. And what do you do for a living?" "Oh, I'm a doctor." "Impressive. What do you do for a living?" "I work at Starbucks." "Great. What do you do for a living?" "I'm a guitar player." And everyone suddenly will say, "Oh, my cousin, he was a guitar player. He didn't go over." Everyone will have an opinion when you're an artist. If you sit at the dinner table and say, "I'm a singer, I'm a dancer, I'm an actor," and your job is to rise above all of that. I'm not saying you have to leave them or distance them, but you do have to distance your value in their opinions, because everyone is going to tell you no. And when it came to music, it was like I just have to keep doing it. I have to keep recording. I have to keep making demos. I have to keep trying. When it came to switching careers entirely, I just woke up and said, literally woke up and said, okay, I'm going to be a director. I set a goal that said I wanted to, I don't know why I set this, but I set a goal when I woke. So doing music, I had this kid named Scott, who kind of worked as our semi booking agent, semi management, semi friend, just someone who was helping us out. And I called him up and I said, I'm going to be a director. I realize now that's what I'm going to do. And so, I set a goal. I think setting goals is what everyone should do, no matter what field you're in. Maybe just write it down if it helps you, or a vision board, or whatever version of it that works for you. And so I said, I want to be able to direct. I had a very specific goal. I wanted to do 3 music videos, 2 short films, and 2 commercials. And if I could do that as my goal, then I was going to move to LA and do what I ended up doing. That's where I am now. I'm in my office. I built my own film studio in Los Angeles. And at the time, one of the hardest things to do was getting the first one. It took, from the time I said that, it took about 6 months before we could find someone to do a music video. I mean, and I was putting ads out saying, I was putting the word out, putting ads out. I will direct your music video for free. I don't want any money. I will pay for the cameras, for this. Just, I'll do it for free. And we couldn't find anyone. It took 6 months before he called and said, I found a band that I book. They have $200, and they said, yes, they'll give you a shot. They'll let you do it. And I was thrilled. To this day, I'm still thankful, because that's what allowed me to start directing. And in the end, I know I set these goals of 2 videos, blah, blah. I probably did like 15 music videos and a bunch of shorts and a bunch of commercials in a very small span of time, just by doing it. You'd be shocked at how much you can achieve if you just say, I'm going to do it, and you set an end date. So one little trick in life that I do is I set the end dates rather than the start dates. because that's just how. So if you said to me, "Hey, I really want you to work on this song," I say, "Okay, the song needs to be finished by Thursday at 5." And you reverse engineer it, and it just helps everything else fall into place. So that's my biggest piece of advice to any dancers, singers, actors, painters, artists. You have to keep painting, you have to keep dancing, you have to keep putting yourself out there, and you have to have a very thick skin. Most people would say you have to have a thick skin to the industry. I don't. I say you have to have a very thick skin to your own inner circle. It's going to be very tough if your own mother and your own father don't want you to dance, don't want you to sing, don't want you to do. And it's not because they don't like you or they don't love you. It's because they love you that they want more security. It's a very insecure business. But you have to have a thick skin to the people you love first. Then you'll have enough. If you can manage that, you'll deal with all the things that come to you in the industry.
Thank you. That's a very good advice. And thank you so much for your time, Waymon.
Hey, I
And
appreciate you.
thank you for sharing your insights, your thoughts, your stories, and at times being vulnerable as well. So I really appreciate that. Anything else you would like to share to your
No,
supporters?
and any kind of stuff that comes up on me will end up on my website of just waymanboone.com.
Thank you, Waymon. Take care.
All right.